Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Society. Tonight, we are drifting into perhaps the most profound story ever told. A story written not in words, but in stone, in cells, in the slow dance of molecules across billions of years. This is the story of life on Earth, a narrative so vast and intricate that it touches every living thing you have ever known, every breath you have ever taken, every moment of wonder you have ever felt. As you settle into this journey, I invite you to let your shoulders drop, to allow your breathing to slow and deepen. If you find peace in these explorations, a gentle like or subscribe helps others discover this quiet corner of science and rest. But for now, all you need to do is listen, to let the words wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you through time itself. Tonight, we will travel back to the very beginning, to a world so alien it would be unrecognizable. We will watch as life emerges from lifelessness, as single cells become forests and oceans teeming with creatures beyond imagination. We will witness extinctions that nearly erased all existence, and rebirths that created new worlds from the ashes of the old. This is a story of resilience, of creativity, of the strange and beautiful fact that you exist at all. Let your mind drift now. Release the tensions of the day. We are going on a journey through deep time, and there is no hurry. The story has waited 4.5 billion years to be told. It can wait a little longer while you find your comfort, while you let the world around you soften and fade. The ancient beginning. Birth of a planet. In the beginning, there was chaos. Imagine, if you can, a swirling disk of gas and dust orbiting a young star. This disk, called the solar nebula, spun in the darkness of space, slowly pulling itself together under the patient force of gravity. Within this cloud, particles collided, stuck together, grew larger. Pebbles became boulders. Boulders became mountains. Mountains became worlds. About 4.54 billion years ago, one of these worlds reached a critical mass. It had gathered enough material to become something significant, something that would one day be called Earth. But this early Earth bore no resemblance to the blue marble we know today. It was a hellscape, a molten sphere of rock so hot that its surface glowed red in the darkness. The young planet was under constant assault, bombarded by asteroids and comets left over from the solar system's formation. This period, fittingly called the Hadean Eon, lasted from Earth's formation until about 4 billion years ago. The name comes from Hades, the ancient Greek underworld, and it is easy to see why. The surface temperature was high enough to melt rock. There was no solid crust as we know it, just a churning ocean of magma lit from below by the planet's internal heat and from above by the impacts of countless objects slamming into its surface. During these early hundreds of millions of years, something monumental happened. A Mars-sized object, sometimes called Theia, collided with the young Earth in an impact of almost incomprehensible violence. The collision was so powerful that it vaporized portions of both worlds, sending a massive amount of debris into orbit around Earth. This debris slowly coalesced, pulled together by gravity, forming what would become our moon. The impact also tilted Earth's axis, giving us the seasons we experience today, though that would matter little for billions of years to come. As the Hadean Eon progressed, Earth began to cool. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, a solid crust formed on the surface of the magma ocean. This crust was thin and unstable, constantly broken and reformed by volcanic activity and continued impacts. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which something more stable could eventually be built. The planet's interior separated into layers, with the densest materials, mostly iron and nickel, sinking to form the core, while lighter materials rose to form the mantle and crust. Around 40.4 billion years ago, Earth had cooled enough for something truly revolutionary to occur. Water vapor in the atmosphere began to condense. Rain fell for the first time, though it likely evaporated before reaching the still scorching surface. But as the planet continued to cool, eventually the rain reached the ground and stayed there. Over millions of years, the rains continued, filling the lowest areas of the crust, creating the first oceans. The origin of Earth's water remains one of the great questions in planetary science. Some of it was certainly trapped in the rocks and minerals that came together to form the planet. But many scientists believe that a significant portion arrived from space, delivered by countless icy comets and water-rich asteroids that crashed into Earth during and after its formation. These cosmic deliveries may have provided not just water, but also organic molecules, the carbon-based building blocks that would prove essential for life. By about 3.8 billion years ago, Earth had transformed. The period of late heavy bombardment, when asteroids and comets pelted the inner solar system with particular intensity, was coming to an end. The planet now had a solid surface, liquid water oceans, and an atmosphere, though one very different from today. This early atmosphere contained little to no oxygen. Instead, it was rich in carbon dioxide, nitrogen, methane, and water vapor. It would have been toxic to us, but it provided the chemical ingredients necessary for something extraordinary. The stage was set. After hundreds of millions of years of violence and chaos, Earth had finally settled into a state that could potentially support life. The oceans were warm, perhaps even hot by our standards. Volcanic activity continued to release gases and minerals into the water and air. Energy flowed through the system from multiple sources: the sun's radiation, lightning strikes, the heat from Earth's interior, and the shock waves from the final diminishing impacts of space debris. In this primordial world, chemistry was about to become biology, the spark of life. Somewhere in the ancient oceans, in circumstances we may never fully understand, something happened that changed everything. A collection of molecules, through chance or necessity or some combination of both, began to organize themselves in a new way. They formed structures that could make copies of themselves, that could capture energy and use it, that could pass information from one generation to the next. Life, in its simplest form, had begun. The exact moment remains shrouded in mystery, hidden in a past so distant that the rocks which might have recorded it have long since been destroyed by geological processes. But we have clues. tantalizing hints etched into some of the oldest surviving rocks on Earth. In western Greenland, in rocks dated to about 3.7 billion years ago, scientists have found distinctive patterns of carbon isotopes, the telltale signature of biological activity. In Western Australia, stromatolites, layered structures created by ancient microbes, have been found in rocks 3.5 billion years old. Even more intriguing are findings from the Nouveau-Jituku belt in Quebec, Canada, where evidence suggests microbial life may have existed as early as 4.28 billion years ago, barely 200 million years after the formation of the first oceans. If these findings are confirmed, it means life arose almost as soon as conditions allowed, perhaps even multiple times, with only the successful lineages surviving to leave descendants. But how did it happen? How does chemistry become biology? This question has occupied scientists for generations, and while we do not have a complete answer, we have developed several compelling theories, each supported by experimental evidence and observations of the modern world. One of the earliest and most influential ideas came from Russian scientist Alexander Oparin in 1924, and British scientist J.B.S. Haldane in 1929. They independently proposed that life arose gradually in what Haldane called a hot dilute soup of organic compounds. According to this hypothesis, the early oceans were rich in simple carbon-based molecules, created by reactions between atmospheric gases energized by lightning, ultraviolet radiation, and volcanic heat. Over time, these molecules accumulated, became more concentrated, and began to interact in increasingly complex ways. In 1952, graduate student Stanley Miller and his advisor, Harold Urey, tested this idea in a now famous experiment. They created a closed system containing waters and gases thought to be present in Earth's early atmosphere, including methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. They then subjected this mixture to electric sparks to simulate lightning. After just a week, they found that the simple starting materials had transformed into a variety of organic compounds, including several amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. The experiment demonstrated that the basic molecules of life could form spontaneously under plausible early Earth conditions. While scientists now believe Earth's early atmosphere was somewhat different from Miller and Urey's mixture, the fundamental insight remains valid. The chemistry of life is not special or magical. It follows the same laws of physics and chemistry as any other process. Given the right ingredients and energy sources, organic molecules will form. Another compelling theory focuses on deep-sea hydrothermal vents. The chimney-like structures that form where seawater seeps into cracks in the ocean floor is heated by magma and shoots back out laden with minerals and dissolved gases. These vents create dramatic plumes of superheated water in the cold ocean depths. Around them, even today, entire ecosystems thrive in complete darkness, powered not by sunlight, but by chemical energy. Hydrothermal vents would have been common in the early oceans, perhaps even more so than today. They provide concentrated sources of chemical energy and create natural chemical gradients. Differences in temperature, acidity, and chemical composition across short distances. Some scientists propose that these gradients could have powered the first metabolic reactions, the energy harvesting processes that all life depends on. The porous, mineral structures of certain types of vents might have even provided natural compartments where molecules could accumulate and react without being diluted by the vast ocean. Yet, another possibility involves clay minerals. Certain types of clay can serve as templates that help organic molecules line up in specific patterns, potentially catalyzing reactions that would be rare in open water. Clay particles can also protect fragile organic molecules from breakdown, preserve them long enough for more complex structures to form. Some researchers suggest that the earliest life may have begun in or on clay deposits, perhaps in shallow pools or in the pores of clay-rich sediments. There is even the intriguing possibility that life's ingredients, or perhaps even primitive life itself, arrived from space. Meteorites and comets contain a variety of organic compounds, including amino acids. During the late heavy bombardment, these objects rained down on Earth's surface, potentially delivering significant amounts of organic material. Some scientists speculate that simple life could have originated on Mars or another body and been transported to Earth on meteorites blasted into space by impacts. This idea, called panspermia, does not solve the ultimate question of how life began, but it expands the possible locations and conditions. Whatever the exact mechanism, the transition from chemistry to biology required several key innovations. First, there had to be some form of metabolism, a way to capture and use energy. Second, there had to be heredity, a way to store and transmit information so that successful molecular arrangements could be reproduced. Third, there had to be variation and selection, allowing some arrangements to outcompete others and become more common over time. Modern life uses DNA to store information, RNA to transmit it, and proteins to perform most of the actual work of metabolism. But this system is far too complex to have appeared all at once. Most scientists now believe that early life used RNA for both information storage and catalysis. RNA molecules can both carry genetic information and perform chemical reactions, making them a plausible candidate for the first self-replicating system. Over time, this RNA world would have been superseded by the more stable and efficient DNA-RNA protein system we see today. The first living things were almost certainly single-celled microorganisms, far simpler than even the simplest bacteria alive today. They had no nucleus, no organelles, no complex internal structures. They were little more than bags of chemicals capable of copying themselves, but that was enough. Once self-replication began, evolution through natural selection became inevitable. Variations arose through errors in copying. Those variations that allowed better survival and reproduction became more common. Those that did not disappeared. Life had not merely begun, it had begun to evolve. The microbial world. For more than half of Earth's history, life remained microscopic and relatively simple. But to call this period uneventful would be profoundly wrong. During these billions of years, microorganisms fundamentally transformed the planet, creating conditions that would eventually allow complex life to emerge. They were pioneers, adapting to every available niche, inventing biochemical pathways that still power life today, and, most dramatically, changing the very composition of the atmosphere. The earliest life forms were likely thermophiles, organisms that thrive in hot environments. This makes sense given that Earth was still significantly warmer than today, and many of the proposed origins of life, such as hydrothermal vents, involve hot water. These ancient microbes probably obtained energy through chemosynthesis, harvesting chemical energy from reactions between minerals and the compounds dissolved in water. They lived in a world without oxygen, an element that would have been toxic to them. As these simple organisms spread and diversified, they formed communities. One of the most striking evidence of early microbial life comes from stromatolites, layered rock structures created when films of microorganisms trap and bind sediment particles. Ancient stromatolites, preserved in rocks over 3 billion years old, show that even the earliest microbes were capable of building visible structures and living in organized communities. Modern stromatolites still form in a few locations around the world, most famously in Shark Bay, Australia. Watching these living fossils grow, we can glimpse what large portions of Earth's ancient shorelines might have looked like. Shallow waters dotted with mounds and columns of microbe-built stone, slowly growing layer by layer as generations of bacteria lived, died, and were buried in sediment. But the real revolution came with the evolution of photosynthesis. Some group of ancient bacteria, perhaps around 3 billion years ago, developed the ability to capture energy directly from sunlight. This was a game changer. For the first time, life was no longer limited to locations with specific chemical conditions. Anywhere sunlight penetrated, these photosynthetic bacteria could thrive. The earliest photosynthesis was probably anoxygenic, meaning it did not produce oxygen as a byproduct. These organisms might have used hydrogen sulfide or other molecules as electron donors, much like purple and green sulfur bacteria do today. But eventually, some bacteria, the ancestors of modern cyanobacteria, evolved oxygenic photosynthesis. They learned to split water molecules, using hydrogen to build organic compounds and releasing oxygen as waste. At first, this oxygen did not accumulate in the atmosphere. It was immediately consumed, reacting with dissolved iron in the oceans to form iron oxide, which settled to the seafloor. Today, we can see the result of this process in banded iron formations, distinctive striped rocks found in ancient sediments around the world. These bands of iron oxide and silica represent billions of tons of oxygen production, all absorbed by the ocean before any could escape to the air. But eventually, perhaps around 2.4 billion years ago, something changed. The dissolved iron in the oceans had been exhausted, all oxidized and deposited on the seafloor. Oxygen produced by photosynthesis began to accumulate in the atmosphere for the first time. This event, called the Great Oxygenation Event, was one of the most significant moments in Earth's history. It was also one of the greatest catastrophes life had ever experienced. For the anaerobic organisms that dominated Earth at the time, oxygen was poison. It reacted with and destroyed many of the molecules they needed to survive. As oxygen levels rose, these ancient life forms retreated to environments where oxygen could not reach. Deep muds, the guts of other organisms, and other oxygen-free zones where their descendants still live today. Many lineages must have gone extinct entirely, victims of the changing atmosphere their own cousins had created. But for other organisms, oxygen was an opportunity. Aerobic respiration, the process of using oxygen to break down organic molecules and extract energy, is far more efficient than anaerobic metabolism. Organisms that could tolerate and eventually exploit oxygen had access to much more energy than their competitors. This energy would eventually fuel the evolution of larger, more complex life forms. The rise of oxygen had other profound effects. In the upper atmosphere, oxygen molecules were broken apart by ultraviolet radiation and recombined into ozone, a molecule consisting of 3 oxygen atoms. This ozone layer absorbed much of the sun's harmful ultraviolet radiation, making Earth's surface a safer place for life. Without the ozone layer, life would have remained largely confined to the depths of the oceans where water provided protection from radiation. Around this time, another crucial development occurred. Some cells began living inside other cells, forming permanent partnerships that would eventually become inseparable. This process, called endosymbiosis, is how complex cells acquired mitochondria, the organelles that use oxygen to generate energy, and chloroplasts, the organelles that perform photosynthesis in plants and algae. The evidence for endosymbiosis is compelling. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA, separate from the cell's nuclear DNA, and this DNA is more similar to the DNA of free-living bacteria than to the DNA of their host cells. Both organelles are surrounded by double membranes, consistent with one cell being engulfed by another, and both reproduce independently within the cell, dividing in a manner similar to bacteria. This merger of simple cells into more complex ones, combined with the energy provided by oxygen, set the stage for the next great revolution in the history of life. But that revolution would be a long time coming. Complex cells, called eukaryotes, first appeared perhaps 2 billion years ago. But for over 1 billion years, they remained small and relatively simple, mostly single-celled organisms drifting in the oceans. The world of microbes continued to dominate. During this enormous span of time, evolution was not idle. Genetic systems became more sophisticated. Cells developed more efficient ways to regulate their internal chemistry, to sense and respond to their environment, to communicate with other cells. Sexual reproduction evolved, dramatically accelerating the pace of evolution. By allowing beneficial mutations from different individuals to be combined in offspring, the groundwork was being laid, slowly but inexorably, for the explosion of complex life that was to come, the emergence of complex life. If you could travel back in time to Earth 600 million years ago, you would find a world both familiar and alien. There were oceans and continents, though arranged very differently than today. There was an atmosphere with oxygen, though still at levels lower than present. And there was life, but mostly still microscopic, invisible to the naked eye. But something was stirring in those ancient seas. Oxygen levels were rising, approaching concentrations that could support larger, more active organisms. Genetic innovations were accumulating, providing new possibilities for organizing cells into multicellular bodies. And then, in a relatively brief period of geological time, life exploded into visibility. This transformation began with the Ediacaran biota, strange organisms that appeared in the fossil record around 580 million years ago. These creatures were unlike anything alive today. Their bodies were often soft and flat, shaped like fronds, discs, and quilted mattresses. They lived on the seafloor or anchored to it, many of them probably absorbing nutrients directly from the water or from photosynthetic partners living in their tissues. The Ediacaran organisms represent one of evolution's grand experiments, body plans that emerged early in the history of complex life but did not persist. Most of them left no descendants. They dominated the oceans for about 40 million years, and then they vanished, replaced by a fundamentally different assemblage of organisms. But their appearance marks a crucial threshold. Life had learned how to build bodies made of many coordinated cells, large enough to see, complex enough to move, and sense and respond to the world in new ways. The extinction of the Ediacaran fauna set the stage for what would come next. Around 540 million years ago, at the beginning of the Cambrian period, life underwent a transformation so rapid and dramatic that it has been called an explosion. Within a span of perhaps 20 million years, most of the major groups of animals we know today appeared in the fossil record. It was as if evolution, after billions of years of preparation, suddenly hit fast forward. The Cambrian explosion was fueled by several factors. Oxygen levels had risen further, providing the energy needed for active lifestyles and the construction of shells and skeletons. Genetic mechanisms for building complex bodies had evolved, including the Hox genes that control body segmentation and the development of different body parts. And perhaps most important, predation had emerged. For the first time, organisms were actively hunting and eating each other, creating an evolutionary arms race that drove rapid innovation in both offensive and defensive capabilities. The Burgess Shale, discovered in the Canadian Rockies in 1909, provides an extraordinary window into this period. Here, the soft tissues of Cambrian organisms were preserved in exquisite detail, captured in a mudslide that buried them before decay could occur. The fossils reveal a riot of body plans, some recognizable as ancestors of modern groups, others so strange they seem almost alien. There was Anomalocaris, a predator up to a meter long with grasping appendages and a circular mouth lined with plates. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a long nozzle-like proboscis with a grasping claw at its tip. Hallucigenia had pairs of spines along its back and tentacle-like legs below. Wywaxia resembled an armored slug covered in scales and spikes. Many of these organisms were evolutionary experiments that left no descendants, extinct branches on the tree of life. But among the bizarre forms were also the ancestors of animals we would recognize. Pikaia, a small swimming creature with a primitive notochord, was probably an early chordate, part of the lineage that would eventually give rise to fish, and, ultimately, to us. Morella, the most common organism in the Burgess Shale, was an early arthropod, a member of the group that includes modern insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Trilobites, with their distinctive segmented bodies and complex eyes, would dominate the oceans for the next 270 million years before finally going extinct. The Cambrian explosion established many of the fundamental body plans that still structure animal life today. Bilateral symmetry, with matching left and right sides. Segmentation, with bodies divided into repeated units that can be modified for different functions. Sophisticated eyes that could form images. Mineralized skeletons that provided protection and anchor points for muscles. Guts with both a mouth and an anus, allowing one-way processing of food. Nervous systems capable of coordinating complex behavior. As these innovations spread and diversified, the oceans became ever more crowded and complex. Different species specialized for different ways of life, partitioning the environment into countless ecological niches. Some filtered food from the water, others grazed on mats of bacteria and algae. Still others scavenged or hunted. Some burrowed into sediments, others swam in open water or attached to the seafloor. Food webs became elaborate, with energy and nutrients cycling through multiple levels of producers, consumers, and decomposers. In this increasingly complex world, evolution favored organisms that could sense their environment more accurately, respond more quickly, and make better decisions. Nervous systems became more sophisticated. Brains began to emerge. Concentrations of nerve cells at the front of the body where sensors like eyes, taste receptors, and chemical detectors were located. Behavior became more complex, less reflexive, more flexible. Yet, for all this diversity and innovation, life remained confined to the oceans. The land surface remained barren, a rocky desert scoured by wind and scorched by unfiltered ultraviolet radiation. But that was about to change. The colonization of land would prove to be one of the greatest adventures in the history of life, opening up an entire new realm for evolution to explore. Life moves to land. The transition from water to land was not a simple leap. It happened gradually, in stages beginning perhaps as early as 500 million years ago. The first pioneers were almost certainly microorganisms, bacteria and algae that formed films on wet rocks and in shallow pools. These microscopic communities began the slow process of weathering rock into soil, creating organic material that would eventually support more complex life. But the real colonization of land began with plants. The ancestors of land plants were green algae living in shallow water, perhaps in tidal zones or along the edges of streams and ponds. These locations presented challenges absent in open water. Water levels fluctuated. Tissues were exposed to air and needed protection from drying out. Gravity, barely noticeable in water, became a significant force. The earliest land plants, appearing in the fossil record around 470 million years ago, were small and simple. Barely more than ground-hugging mats of tissue. They had no roots, no leaves, no flowers. They anchored themselves with hair-like rhizoids and absorbed water and nutrients directly through their surfaces. But they had evolved a crucial innovation, a waxy coating called a cuticle that prevented water loss, along with small pores that could open and close to regulate gas exchange. With these adaptations, they could survive in air. As plants diversified and spread, they began to grow taller, competing for light. This required structural support, provided by the evolution of vascular tissues that could transport water and nutrients through the plant body and provide mechanical strength. By 420 million years ago, during the Silurian period, the land was covered in forests of primitive vascular plants like Cooksonia, still less than 10 centimeters tall. But evolution was accelerating. Roots evolved, allowing plants to anchor more firmly and extract water and minerals from deeper in the soil. Leaves evolved, flat surfaces that could capture more sunlight for photosynthesis. By the Devonian period, about 400 million years ago, forests of tree-sized plants were growing, including giant horsetails and club mosses that towered 30 meters high. The land had turned green. This transformation of the landscape had profound effects on the atmosphere and climate. Plants drew carbon dioxide from the air and locked it away in their tissues. As plants died and were buried, this carbon was sequestered in the ground rather than being returned to the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels dropped while oxygen levels rose even higher. The temperature cooled. The land surface, once naked rock, was now covered in soil rich in organic matter, held together by plant roots and microbial communities. Animals followed the plants onto land, though the fossil record of early terrestrial animals is frustratingly sparse. The first were almost certainly arthropods, relatives of modern millipedes, centipedes, and arachnids. Their jointed exoskeletons, already adapted for support in water, worked equally well in air. They found abundant food in the form of decomposing plant matter, fungi, and each other. By 410 million years ago, millipedes, primitive arachnids, and small hexapods, possibly early insects, were established on land. These early terrestrial arthropods faced challenges their aquatic ancestors never encountered. They needed to prevent water loss, requiring waxy coatings and more sophisticated respiratory systems. They, needed to support their bodies against gravity without the buoyancy of water. They needed to reproduce without access to water for their eggs and larvae, leading to the evolution of direct development and internal fertilization. But they also found opportunities. Abundant food with relatively few predators, new niches opening up faster than they could be filled. The colonization of land by vertebrates came later and took a different path. The ancestors of land vertebrates were lobe-finned fish, relatives of modern coelacanths, and lungfish. These fish already had several pre-adaptations useful for life on land. Their fleshy, muscular fins could support weight and move in a way similar to limbs. Many had primitive lungs or lung-like structures for breathing air, useful in the stagnant, low-oxygen waters they often inhabited. Around 370 million years ago, at the end of the Devonian period, some of these fish began spending more time out of water. Fossil evidence shows transitional forms with features intermediate between fish and amphibians. Tiktaalik, discovered in Arctic Canada, had a flattened head with eyes on top, a neck that allowed it to turn its head, and sturdy fins with early wrist bones. It probably lived in shallow streams and could pull itself out of the water to move between pools or escape predators. Over time, these creatures became less fish-like and more adapted to terrestrial life. By the Carboniferous period, about 350 million years ago, amphibians had diversified into numerous forms. Some remained small and newt-like. Others grew enormous, reaching lengths of several meters. They laid their eggs in water, and their larvae went through an aquatic tadpole stage before metamorphosing into the adult form, much like modern frogs and salamanders. The Carboniferous world would have seemed surreal to modern eyes. Vast swamp forests of giant horsetails, club mosses, and seed ferns covered much of the land. The atmosphere contained about 35% oxygen, significantly higher than today's 21%. This high oxygen level allowed arthropods to grow to immense sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans of 70 centimeters hunted above the forests. Millipedes over 2 meters long crawled through the leaf litter. Scorpions the size of cats stalked the undergrowth. But the amphibians were not the final step in vertebrate evolution on land. Their dependence on water for reproduction limited their range to areas near streams, ponds, and wetlands. The next great innovation, the amniotic egg, would free vertebrates to spread across the entire land surface. This egg, with its tough shell and internal membranes to protect and nourish the embryo, evolved around 320 million years ago in the ancestors of modern reptiles, birds, and mammals. With this adaptation, vertebrates could reproduce anywhere, and the stage was set for the age of reptiles to begin. The age of giants, dinosaurs, and beyond. The evolution of the amniotic egg marked a profound transition in the history of land animals. For the first time, vertebrates could complete their entire life cycle on land, freed from the need to return to water for reproduction. This new capability allowed them to spread into environments their amphibian cousins could never reach. Deserts, mountains, dry plains far from any water source. From the ancestral amniotes, 3 great lineages would emerge: the synapsids, which would eventually give rise to mammals; the anapsids, including turtles and their relatives; and the diapsids, the lineage that would produce dinosaurs, birds, and most modern reptiles. During the Permian period, from about 299 to 252 million years ago, the synapsids dominated the land. These were the famous mammal-like reptiles, though they were not actually reptiles in the modern sense. Some, like Dimetrodon with its distinctive sail, were fearsome predators. Others, like the tusked Lystrosaurus, were herbivores. Many had features that seem intermediate between reptiles and mammals: sprawling but increasingly upright limbs, teeth differentiated for different functions, possibly even the beginnings of hair and warm-bloodedness. But the Permian period ended in disaster. 252 million years ago, the most severe mass extinction in Earth's history struck. The Permian Triassic extinction event, sometimes called the Great Dying, eliminated about 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. The causes remain debated, but massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia likely played a major role, releasing enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and triggering runaway global warming, ocean acidification, and widespread oxygen depletion. In the aftermath of this catastrophe, life on Earth was devastated. Ecosystems collapsed. The few surviving species spread across an emptied planet with little competition and endless opportunities. Among the survivors were the archosaurs, the ruling reptiles, ancestors of crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. During the Triassic period, these reptiles diversified explosively, evolving into numerous forms adapted for different lifestyles. The first dinosaurs appeared about 230 million years ago during the Middle to Late Triassic. They were not initially dominant, just one group among many competing reptiles. But they had certain advantages. Many were bipedal, walking on their hind legs, which freed their forelimbs for grasping. Their legs were positioned directly under their bodies rather than sprawling out to the sides, allowing for more efficient locomotion. Many were probably warm-blooded, or at least it could maintain elevated body temperatures, giving them higher activity levels than many of their competitors. Another mass extinction at the end of the Triassic, around 201 million years ago, cleared the way for dinosaur dominance. For the next 135 million years, through the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, dinosaurs would rule the land. They diversified into an astounding array of forms, from tiny bird-like predators barely larger than a chicken to the massive sauropods, the largest land animals ever to exist. Sauropods like Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, and Argentinosaurus were engineering marvels. They could weigh up to 70 or even 100 tons, with necks stretching 15 meters or more. They achieved these sizes through numerous adaptations: hollow bones to reduce weight, highly efficient respiratory systems with air sacs extending throughout their bodies, and digestive systems that could process enormous quantities of plant matter. They lived in herds, migrating across continents to find food, leaving trackways that can still be found today, frozen in ancient stone. The theropods, the meat-eating dinosaurs, ranged from giants like Tyrannosaurus rex and Giganotosaurus, predators 6 meters tall and weighing several tons, down to graceful forms like Compsognathus, barely larger than a modern chicken. Many, especially the smaller ones, had feathers, initially perhaps for insulation or display, but eventually enabling flight. By the Middle Jurassic, about 160 million years ago, some small theropods had evolved powered flight, becoming the first birds. Archaeopteryx, with its reptilian teeth and long bony tail but feathered wings, represents this transition. Herbivorous dinosaurs evolved an incredible variety of defensive adaptations. The ankylosaurs were living tanks, low to the ground and covered in bony armor, with massive clubs at the ends of their tails that could shatter bones. Stegosaurus had rows of plates running down its back, possibly for display or temperature regulation, and a spiked tail it wielded like a weapon. Triceratops had 3 horns and a massive bony frill, using these weapons to defend against predators and compete with rivals for mates. The hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, had hundreds of teeth for grinding tough plant material and elaborate crests on their heads that may have been used for producing sounds. Life was not confined to the land. In the oceans, marine reptiles diversified into numerous forms. Ichthyosaurs were dolphin-like reptiles with streamlined bodies perfectly adapted for fast swimming in open water. Plesiosaurs had broad bodies, 4 flippers, and either very long necks, in the plesiosauroids, or large heads with powerful jaws, in the pliosauroids. Mosasaurs, which appeared later in the Cretaceous, were enormous predatory lizards, some reaching over 15 meters in length, that ruled the seas in the final days of the dinosaurs. The skies, too, were dominated by reptiles. Pterosaurs, cousins of the dinosaurs but not dinosaurs themselves, were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, evolving about 225 million years ago. They ranged from sparrow-sized species like Namicalopterus to giants like Quetzalcoatlus, with wingspans of over 10 meters, the largest flying animals ever to exist. Their wings were formed by membranes of skin stretched from an enormously elongated fourth finger to their hind limbs and body. Many had elaborate crests on their heads, possibly used for display, sexual selection, or as rudders during flight. During this long age of reptiles, a quiet revolution was occurring in the plant world. Flowering plants, or angiosperms, first appeared in the fossil record about 140 million years ago during the early Cretaceous. They evolved from gymnosperm ancestors, plants like conifers and cycads that produce naked seeds, but with innovations that would eventually make them the dominant plants on land. Flowers for attracting animal pollinators, fruits for protecting and dispersing seeds, and more efficient vascular systems. The evolution of flowering plants transformed terrestrial ecosystems. Flowers created new opportunities for insects, leading to coevolution between plants and their pollinators. Early bees, butterflies, beetles, and flies diversified alongside the plants they fed on. Fruits provided food for animals that could disperse seeds far from the parent plant. The diversity of plant forms, from grasses to orchids to oak trees, created new niches and new food sources, supporting increasingly complex ecosystems. For 135 million years, through changing climates and shifting continents, dinosaurs persisted. They spread across the entire globe, from polar forests to tropical islands. They evolved, adapted, and dominated. It seemed as though their reign might last forever. But 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous period, their world came to a sudden and catastrophic end. Mass extinctions, life's greatest tests. If there is one lesson that emerges clearly from the fossil record, it is this: extinction is not an aberration but a fundamental feature of life on Earth. The vast majority of all species that have ever existed are now extinct. The typical lifespan of a species, from its origin to its disappearance, is measured in millions of years, a long time by human standards, but a brief flicker in the vast expanse of geological time. But within this background pattern of extinction, there have been moments of crisis, periods when the normal rules seemed to break down, and death swept across the planet with unusual intensity. Paleontologists have identified 5 great mass extinctions in the last 540 million years, events during which more than half of all existing species vanished within a relatively short geological period. These events profoundly shaped the history of life, closing some evolutionary pathways forever while opening up new possibilities for the survivors. The first of these great extinctions occurred at the end of the Ordovician period, about 443 million years ago. At this time, most complex life was still confined to the oceans. Marine invertebrates, including trilobites, brachiopods, and early echinoderms, had diversified into numerous forms. But then, over a period of perhaps a million years, 85% of all species disappeared. The causes were complex, involving both cooling and warming events. It appears that the southern supercontinent Gondwana drifted over the South Pole, triggering glaciation. Sea levels dropped dramatically as water was locked up in ice sheets. Many marine organisms, adapted to warm, shallow seas, found their habitats frozen or drained. Then, as the glaciers melted, temperatures and sea levels swung rapidly upward, creating further disruption. Many lineages that had survived for tens of millions of years were erased. The late Devonian extinction, about 374 million years ago, was actually a series of pulses spread over several million years. This event particularly affected marine life. Reef-building organisms were devastated. Many fish lineages vanished. About 75% of all species went extinct. The causes remain debated, but appear to involve a complex interplay of factors including climate change, sea level fluctuations, ocean anoxia, loss of oxygen in deep waters, and possibly asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions. But these events were preludes to the greatest catastrophe of all. 252 million years ago, at the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods, life on Earth came closer to complete annihilation than at any other time in the past 500 million years. The Permian-Triassic extinction event eliminated 96% of all marine species, 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species, 83% of all insect species, and 57% of all families. It was, quite literally, the closest life has come to complete extinction. The trigger was likely massive volcanic activity in Siberia. For hundreds of thousands or even millions of years, lava poured out, covering an area larger than Western Europe. The eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and toxic gases into the atmosphere. Global temperatures soared by perhaps 10 degrees Celsius or more. The oceans became acidic and lost their oxygen. Hydrogen sulfide, toxic to most life, may have built up in the water and even been released into the atmosphere. On land, acid rain fell. Forests died. The very air may have become poisonous. In the aftermath, Earth's ecosystems were devastated. Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivorous synapsid, may have made up 95% of all land vertebrates for a time, simply because it was one of the few survivors. In the oceans, disaster taxa, simple organisms tolerant of harsh conditions, dominated. Full recovery took 5 to 10 million years or longer, But recover life did, and in the empty world left behind, new forms emerged. The age of dinosaurs was beginning. The fourth great extinction came at the end of the Triassic period, about 200 to 1 million years ago. Though less severe than the Permian-Triassic event, it still eliminated about 70 to 75% of all species. Marine reptiles and many large amphibians vanished. Among land animals, many synapsids and early dinosaur relatives went extinct. The causes are unclear and may have involved volcanic activity, climate change, or asteroid impact. Whatever the trigger, this extinction cleared the way for dinosaurs to rise to dominance. And then came the most famous extinction of all. 66 million years ago, at the end of the Cretaceous period, dinosaurs that had dominated the land for 135 million years vanished. Marine reptiles disappeared. Pterosaurs disappeared. Ammonites, mollusks, with beautiful coiled shells that had thrived in the oceans for hundreds of millions of years, disappeared. About 75% of all species went extinct. The world changed forever. For decades, the cause of this extinction was debated. But in 1980, a team of scientists led by Luis and Walter Alvarez proposed a radical explanation: a massive asteroid impact. They based this on a thin layer of clay found at the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, enriched with iridium, an element rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. This iridium spike has since been found all over the world, always at exactly the same geological boundary. In 1991, the smoking gun was found. The Chicxulub crater buried beneath the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The crater is about 180 kilometers in diameter, formed by an asteroid about 10 to 15 kilometers across. The impact would have released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. Rock vaporized instantly. A shockwave propagated around the planet. Tsunamis, hundreds of meters high, swept across nearby coastlines. Debris blasted into the upper atmosphere, eventually falling back to Earth, heating the atmosphere to oven-like temperatures and setting off wildfires across the globe. But the immediate effects were just the beginning. Dust and soot blocked out the sun for months or years. Photosynthesis ceased. Temperatures plummeted. Plants died, followed by the herbivores that depended on them, followed by the carnivores that hunted the herbivores. Acid rain fell. The chemistry of the oceans changed. In the darkness and cold, the great reptiles that had ruled for so long simply could not survive. Yet some creatures made it through. Small mammals, already present but relegated to marginal roles during the age of dinosaurs, survived. Birds, descended from small feathered dinosaurs, survived. Crocodiles and turtles survived. Many groups of fish, insects, and plants survived. These survivors inherited a devastated but empty world, a world where the dominant players were gone and countless ecological niches stood vacant. Each of these mass extinctions had profound effects on the subsequent history of life. They removed successful lineages that had dominated for millions of years. Lineages that, in the normal course of events, might have persisted far longer. By removing these incumbents, extinctions opened up opportunities for groups that had been marginal or subordinate. Mammals, for instance, had coexisted with dinosaurs for over 100 million years, but had remained mostly small and nocturnal. Only after the dinosaurs vanished could mammals diversify into the countless forms we see today, from whales to bats to elephants to ourselves. Mass extinctions reveal something fundamental about life. It is resilient, but not infinitely so. Given time, life recovers from even the most devastating blows. New species evolve to fill empty niches. Ecosystems rebuild. Diversity eventually returns to or exceeds pre-extinction levels. But the recovery is not a simple restoration of what was lost. Evolution cannot run backward. The life that emerges after an extinction is fundamentally different from what came before. The evolutionary pathways closed by extinction can never be reopened. Each mass extinction reshuffles the deck, creating a new starting point from which future evolution must proceed. The rise of mammals. In the months and years following the asteroid impact, the world was a desolate place. The skies had cleared of dust, but the landscapes they revealed were transformed. Forests had burned. Many rivers and lakes had dried up or been choked with sediment. The great reptiles were gone, their bones scattered across a dying world. But in the ruins, life persisted. And among the survivors, one group was poised to seize an opportunity that would never come again. Mammals had existed since the Triassic period, arising from synapsid ancestors about 220 million years ago. For most of their history, they had been small, mostly nocturnal creatures living in the shadow of the dinosaurs. The largest Mesozoic mammals were about the size of modern badgers. Most were much smaller, some no bigger than shrews. They ate insects, seeds, perhaps small reptiles when they could catch them. They were warm-blooded and probably had fur. Many likely gave birth to live young that they nursed with milk, though some early forms may have still laid eggs like modern monotremes, platypuses, and echidnas. But in the aftermath of the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, the mammals found a world suddenly open to them. Within just a few million years, a geological instant, they began to diversify explosively. This radiation, the adaptive expansion of mammals into countless ecological niches, produced the incredible variety of mammalian life we see today. Some mammals became herbivores, evolving specialized teeth and digestive systems to process plant matter. The ungulates, ancestors of modern horses, deer, elephants, and cattle, evolved hooves and long legs for running across open plains. Their teeth became ever more complex, with high crowns and intricate ridges for grinding tough grasses and leaves. Some grew to enormous sizes. Andrikotherium, a hornless rhinoceros relative from the Oligocene epoch, stood 5.5 meters tall at the shoulder and weighed about 15 to 20 tons, the largest land mammal ever to exist. Other mammals became predators. The creodonts were early carnivores with powerful jaws and shearing teeth. They were eventually replaced by the carnivorans, the group that includes modern cats, dogs, bears, seals, and many others. These predators evolved remarkable adaptations. the retractable claws and flexible spine of cats, perfect for stalking and pouncing, the endurance and pack hunting strategies of wolves, the powerful jaws and omnivorous diet of bears, the streamlined bodies and flippers of seals and sea lions that returned to the oceans. Some of the most dramatic mammalian evolution occurred in the oceans. Several different mammal lineages independently returned to the water. The cetaceans, ancestors of modern whales and dolphins, evolved from small hoofed mammals that lived near water. Over millions of years, their bodies became streamlined. Their front limbs became flippers. Their hind limbs vanished entirely, leaving only vestigial bones buried deep in their bodies. A fluke developed on their tail for propulsion. Nostrils migrated to the top of the head, becoming blowholes. Some species grew to immense sizes. The blue whale, up to 30 meters long and weighing over 150 tons, is the largest animal ever known to have existed. Another group, the pinnipeds, seals, sea lions, and walruses, also returned to the sea but retained stronger ties to land, coming ashore to rest and breed. The sirenians, manatees, and dugongs became fully aquatic herbivores, grazing on seagrass meadows. Each group evolved independently, providing striking examples of convergent evolution. Similar solutions to similar problems arising in unrelated lineages. Mammals even mastered the air. Bats, appearing in the fossil record about 50 million years ago, were the only mammals to evolve powered flight. Their wings are formed by membranes of skin stretched between elongated finger bones, a very different structure from the feathered wings of birds or the skin and finger wings of pterosaurs. Bats diversified into over 1,400 species, the second most diverse group of mammals after rodents. Most are insectivorous, using echolocation to hunt in complete darkness, but some eat fruit, nectar, fish, or even blood. Primates, the group that would eventually give rise to humans, also emerged early in the age of mammals. The first primates appeared about 65 million years ago, shortly after the extinction of the dinosaurs. These early forms were small, tree-dwelling creatures, probably similar to modern tree shrews. Living in trees favored certain traits: grasping, hands and feet with opposable thumbs for gripping branches, forward-facing eyes with stereoscopic vision for judging distances while jumping, enlarged brains for processing complex three-dimensional environments. Over tens of millions of years, primates diversified. Some lineages gave rise to lemurs, lorises, and tarsiers. Others became monkeys. Both New World monkeys in South America and Old World monkeys in Africa and Asia. And from Old World monkeys arose the apes, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and eventually us. The age of mammals was shaped not just by evolution, but also by dramatic changes in the Earth's climate and geography. After the warm conditions of the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, the planet began to cool. Antarctica, which had drifted to the South Pole, became covered in ice. Ocean circulation patterns changed. About 34 million years ago, the Oligocene epoch began with a significant cooling event. Tropical forests retracted. grasslands spread. This cooling trend accelerated about 2.6 million years ago with the beginning of the Pleistocene epoch, better known as the Ice Age. Massive ice sheets advanced and retreated across northern continents in cycles driven by subtle variations in Earth's orbit. Sea levels fell during glacial periods as water was locked up in ice, rose again during warmer interglacials. Many large mammal species, the famous megafauna, evolved adaptations for the cold. Thick fur, large body size for heat retention, specialized diets. In Eurasia and North America, mammoths and mastodons roamed Ice Age grasslands. Giant ground sloths lumbered through forests and plains in the Americas. Cave bears hibernated in European caves. Saber-toothed cats stalked prey using their enormous elongated canines. Glyptodons, armored mammals the size of cars, grazed in South America. In Australia, giant wombats, massive kangaroos, and fierce marsupial lions dominated. But as the Ice Age progressed, something else was happening, something that would change the planet more profoundly than any volcano, asteroid, or ice sheet. One lineage of African apes was evolving in an unusual direction. They were becoming bipedal, walking upright. Their brains were growing larger. They were beginning to use tools to control fire, to develop language and culture. They were becoming human, and their impact on Earth's living systems would soon rival that of any mass extinction. The web of life, biodiversity today. After 4 billion years of evolution, Earth today is home to an almost incomprehensible variety of life. The exact number of species remains unknown. Scientists have formally described and named about 1.7 million species, but this is certainly only a fraction of the total. Estimates of Earth's total biodiversity range from 5 million to over 1 trillion species, with most recent studies suggesting perhaps 8 to 10 million, though microbial diversity makes any estimate uncertain. The distribution of this diversity is far from uniform. Certain regions, called biodiversity hotspots, contain extraordinary concentrations of species, particularly species found nowhere else. Tropical rainforests, though covering only about 6% of Earth's land surface, may contain half of all terrestrial species. Coral reefs, covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, support about 25% of all marine species. These patterns reflect both historical and current processes. Tropical regions have been relatively stable over millions of years, allowing species to accumulate. They have high productivity, with abundant sunlight and rainfall supporting complex food webs. They have structural complexity, with forests forming multiple vertical layers and reefs providing countless crevices and surfaces. And they have geographic complexity, with mountains, islands, and rivers creating barriers that promote the evolution of new species. The diversity we see today exists at multiple levels. There is genetic diversity, the variation in DNA sequences within and between populations. This variation is the raw material for evolution, allowing species to adapt to changing conditions. There is species diversity, the number and variety of different species in a region. And there is ecosystem diversity, the variety of different habitats, communities, and ecological processes. All of this diversity is interconnected in intricate ways. Species depend on each other through relationships like predation, competition, mutualism, and parasitism. Energy flows through ecosystems as organisms eat and are eaten. Nutrients cycle as organisms grow, die, and decompose. Forests affect climate through their influence on the water cycle and carbon storage. Ocean organisms affect atmosphere through photosynthesis and respiration. Microorganisms in soil support plant growth, which supports animal life, which supports decomposers, completing the cycle. These connections create what ecologists call food webs, complex networks showing who eats whom. Unlike the simple linear food chains often depicted in textbooks, real food webs are intricate tangles with multiple pathways and feedback loops. The loss of a single species can ripple through a food web in unpredictable ways, sometimes having little effect, sometimes causing cascading extinctions. Consider the tropical rainforest, perhaps Earth's most complex terrestrial ecosystem. The canopy, formed by the crowns of the tallest trees, is a world unto itself, home to countless insects, birds, mammals, and epiphytes, plants that grow on other plants. Below the canopy, in the shade, smaller trees and shrubs form additional layers. On the ground, the forest floor is covered in decomposing leaves, providing habitat for fungi, insects, and countless microorganisms that break down dead material and return nutrients to the soil. The trees themselves are marvels of evolution and ecology. Many have formed partnerships with fungi, called mycorrhizae, that extend their root systems, helping them absorb water and nutrients. In return, the trees provide the fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. Other trees host nitrogen-fixing bacteria in their roots, converting atmospheric nitrogen into a form plants can use. Animals that eat fruits and seeds disperse them across the forest, often to specific locations where germination is most likely to succeed. Pollinators, including bees, butterflies, moths, birds, and bats, transfer pollen between flowers, allowing reproduction. The interdependence goes deeper still. Many rainforest plants have evolved specific relationships with specific pollinators. Some orchids produce flowers that mimic female insects, tricking males into attempting to mate with them, and thus transferring pollen. Certain figs can only be pollinated by certain tiny wasps, and those wasps can only complete their life cycle in those particular figs. The extinction of one partner would doom the other. Or consider a coral reef, sometimes called the rainforest of the sea. Corals themselves are colonial animals, each colony composed of thousands of tiny polyps, related to jellyfish and anemones. But corals cannot survive alone. They host symbiotic algae called zooxanthellae in their tissues. These algae photosynthesize, providing the coral with most of its energy. In return, the coral provides the algae with protection and access to sunlight. This partnership allows corals to build the massive calcium carbonate structures that form reefs. Reefs support extraordinary diversity. Fish graze on algae, keeping it from overgrowing the coral. Cleaner fish and shrimp remove parasites from larger fish. Predatory fish control herbivore populations. Parrotfish scrape algae from rocks, incidentally breaking off pieces of coral and creating sand. Sea urchins, starfish, crustaceans, mollusks, sponges, and countless other invertebrates find food and shelter on the reef. At night, a different set of species emerges, including octopuses, lobsters, and various fish that spend the day hidden in crevices. Even seemingly simple ecosystems reveal complexity on closer inspection. A grassland appears to be just grass and herbivores, but the grass itself comprises numerous species, each adapted to slightly different conditions. Below ground, an unseen world exists. Roots, fungi, bacteria, earthworms, insects, and other soil organisms. This below-ground ecosystem can contain more biomass and species than the above-ground portion. The health of the grass depends on this hidden community. And everywhere, microorganisms form the foundation of life. Bacteria and archaea break down dead material, releasing nutrients. They fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. They cycle carbon, sulfur, and other elements. In our own bodies, we host trillions of microorganisms, mostly in our digestive systems, that help us digest food, synthesize vitamins, and defend against pathogens. We are not individuals, but ecosystems, walking communities of species. Evolution continues to shape this diversity. Natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, and other processes are operating in real time, right now, across the planet. Organisms are adapting to new conditions, to new competitors, to new diseases. Species are evolving and going extinct. The web of life is not static but dynamic, constantly changing even as larger patterns persist. This biodiversity provides countless benefits to humans, what ecologists call ecosystem services. Forests produce oxygen, sequester carbon, regulate water cycles, prevent erosion, and provide timber, medicine, and food. Wetlands filter water, buffer storms, and provide fish and waterfowl habitat. Pollinators are essential for agriculture. Predators control prey that might otherwise become pests. Decomposers recycle nutrients, allowing continued productivity. The economic value of these services has been estimated in the trillions of dollars annually, though any such estimate necessarily misses intangible values. But today, this intricate web of life faces unprecedented threats. We are living through what many scientists call the sixth mass extinction, and this time, the cause is not an asteroid or volcano. The cause is us, humans, and the sixth extinction. Humans evolved in Africa about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, part of a long lineage of primate evolution. For most of our existence, we lived in small groups as hunters and gatherers, using stone tools, controlling fire, and developing increasingly complex language and culture. Our impact on the environment was real but limited. We hunted large animals, sometimes to extinction, and used fire to manage landscapes. But our total numbers were small. But about 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age was ending, a revolution began. Humans in several different regions independently invented agriculture, learning to domesticate plants and animals. This allowed much higher population densities. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, cities into civilizations. Technology advanced. Population grew. And our impact on the natural world intensified. At first, this impact was local. Forests were cleared for fields. Rivers were dammed for irrigation. Wild animals were hunted for food and eliminated as competitors. But the overall pattern of life on Earth remained largely intact. Wilderness still covered most of the planet. The oceans were full of fish. The skies darkened with migrating birds. Over the past few centuries, and especially in the last 100 years, this has changed dramatically. Human population has exploded from under 1 billion in 1800 to nearly 8 billion today. We have converted about half of Earth's ice-free land surface for human use, mostly agriculture. We have removed much of the ocean's fish, with many populations collapsed to a fraction of historical levels. We have fragmented and degraded most remaining natural habitats. We have moved species around the globe, introducing invasive species that outcompete natives. And we have altered the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans through the burning of fossil fuels. The effects on biodiversity have been catastrophic. Current extinction rates are estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural background rate. A 2019 assessment by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services found that about 1 million plant and animal species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades. About 8% of known animal species are estimated to have gone extinct since the year 1500. These numbers, sobering as they are, certainly underestimate the full scale of the crisis. Many species go extinct before being scientifically described, especially small insects, fungi, and microorganisms. Population declines, even for species not yet extinct, have been severe. A 2020 study found that vertebrate populations have declined by an average of 68% since 1970. Many species that still exist are functionally extinct, their numbers too low to fulfill their ecological roles or sustain viable breeding populations. Different groups have been affected differently, but patterns emerge. Large animals have suffered disproportionately. Megafauna extinctions began tens of thousands of years ago as humans spread across the globe and continue today. Island species, having evolved in isolation without certain predators or competitors, are particularly vulnerable to introduced species. Specialist species, those with narrow dietary or habitat requirements, are more threatened than generalists. Freshwater species face greater extinction risk than terrestrial or marine species, as rivers and lakes are easily polluted and disrupted. The causes of modern extinctions are multiple and interacting. Habitat destruction is the primary driver. Tropical forests, home to the greatest terrestrial biodiversity, are being cleared at an alarming rate for agriculture, logging, and development. Grasslands have been plowed for crops. Wetlands have been drained. Rivers have been dammed, fragmented, and channeled. About 75% of terrestrial environments, and 66% of marine environments have been significantly altered by human activities. Overexploitation, hunting and fishing beyond sustainable levels, has devastated many species. Passenger pigeons, once numbering in the billions, were hunted to extinction in the wild by 1900. The great auk, a flightless seabird of the North Atlantic, was hunted to extinction by the mid-1800s. Whales were nearly driven extinct by commercial whaling in the 20th century. Many fish populations have collapsed, with some species like Atlantic cod reduced to a tiny fraction of historical abundance. Pollution takes many forms, all harmful. Chemical pollution, including pesticides, heavy metals, and industrial waste, poisons organisms and accumulates in food chains. Plastic pollution has reached every corner of the globe, from Arctic sea ice to the deepest ocean trenches, harming wildlife through ingestion and entanglement. Nutrient pollution, mostly from agricultural runoff, causes dead zones in coastal waters, where algae blooms consume all oxygen. Light and noise pollution affect animal behavior, migration, and reproduction. Climate change, driven by the release of greenhouse gases from burning fossil fuels, is becoming an increasingly dominant threat. As temperatures rise, species must adapt, move to cooler regions, or go extinct. Many cannot move fast enough or find suitable habitat. Coral reefs are bleaching as warmer waters stress the coral algae partnership. Arctic and Antarctic ecosystems are being transformed as sea ice disappears. The timing of seasonal events, like flowering or migration, is shifting, disrupting ecological relationships. The synergistic effects of multiple stressors make the situation worse. A species might tolerate habitat loss, or climate change, or pollution individually, but the combination overwhelms its capacity to adapt. Small, fragmented populations are more vulnerable to disease, genetic problems, and random events. As species disappear, ecosystems simplify and lose resilience, making further extinctions more likely. Yet despite this grim picture, all is not lost. Conservation efforts have achieved real successes. Protected areas now cover about 15% of land surface and 7% of oceans, providing refuges for biodiversity. Many species have been brought back from the brink of extinction through captive breeding, habitat protection, and the control of threats. Bald eagles, gray whales, southern white rhinos, humpback whales, and giant pandas have all recovered significantly, though they remain threatened. Restoration ecology seeks to repair damaged ecosystems. Reforestation projects are replanting millions of trees. Wetlands are being restored. Rivers are being returned to more natural conditions by removing dams and restoring floodplains. These efforts can work, though restored ecosystems rarely achieve the full complexity and diversity of undisturbed natural systems. International agreements, while imperfect, represent growing recognition of the global nature of biodiversity loss. The Convention on Biological Diversity, ratified by nearly every country, commits nations to conserve biodiversity. CITES regulates international trade in endangered species. The Paris Agreement addresses climate change. More recent frameworks set targets for protecting 30% of Earth's land and oceans by 2030. Individual actions matter too. Choosing sustainable products, reducing consumption, supporting conservation organizations, and advocating for protective policies all contribute. Perhaps most important is simply spreading awareness, helping more people understand the value of biodiversity and the urgency of the crisis. The outcome remains uncertain. We have the knowledge and tools to prevent the worst outcomes, but we must choose to use them. The choice we make in the coming decades will determine not just the fate of countless species, but the future habitability of Earth for our own descendants. We are living through a hinge point in history, a moment when one species has the power to reshape the entire web of life. How we use that power will echo through millennia to come. Closing reflection and future. And so we find ourselves here, at the end of a journey through deep time. We have traveled from the violent birth of a planet to the intricate web of life that covers it today. We have witnessed the emergence of life from lifeless chemistry, watched it diversify into forms beyond counting, seen it nearly annihilated, and yet always, somehow, persisting. We have followed a path from single cells to complex ecosystems, from the first pioneers on land to the creatures that now fly, swim, and walk across every environment Earth has to offer. Throughout this immense sweep of time, one theme emerges again and again. Life is resilient. After every catastrophe, no matter how severe, life has recovered. The Permian extinction killed 96% of marine species, yet within 10 million years, the oceans were once again full of diverse life. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs created a brief hell on Earth. Yet within a few million years, mammals had diversified into countless new forms. Life finds a way, not through invulnerability, but through diversity, through the fact that somewhere, some species survives to become the ancestor of future abundance. But resilience is not the same as immunity. Mass extinctions have repeatedly shown that even successful dominant groups that thrived for millions of years can vanish. Trilobites survived 2 mass extinctions before succumbing to the third. Ammonites persisted for over 300 million years before finally disappearing. Life recovers, yes, but the species that are lost forever. The unique adaptations, the peculiar beauties, the specific solutions to the challenges of existence that they represented can never be recreated. Evolution does not run backward. Each extinction closes doors that will never reopen. Today, we stand at a unique moment. For the first time in Earth's history, a single species has the power to cause a mass extinction through its own actions. But also, for the first time, a species has the awareness to recognize what it is doing and the capacity to change course. We are simultaneously the threat and the hope. The life that surrounds us, from the microbes in the soil beneath our feet to the whales in the oceans to the birds in the air, is not separate from us. We are part of it, one branch on the tree of life, connected through billions of years of shared ancestry to every other living thing. The atoms in our bodies were forged in stars, cycled through countless organisms, and will continue cycling long after we are gone. We breathe oxygen produced by photosynthesis, drink water that has moved through the water cycle for billions of years, eat food that depends on pollination and fertile soil and favorable climate. Our existence depends utterly on the health of the living systems around us. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson of this long story. Life on Earth is not just a collection of separate species, competing and consuming in a struggle for existence. It is an interconnected whole, a planetary process that has shaped the atmosphere, the oceans, the land surface, creating and maintaining conditions suitable for its own persistence. We damage this system at our own peril. We protect it for our own sake as much as for the sake of the countless species with which we share this world. There is reason for hope. All around the world, people are working to understand and protect biodiversity. Scientists are studying ecosystems, documenting species, unraveling ecological relationships. Conservationists are protecting habitats, rescuing endangered species, restoring degraded landscapes. Educators are helping new generations understand the wonder and value of the natural world. And, increasingly, ordinary people are recognizing that we can no longer afford to treat nature as something separate from human concerns, something to be exploited without consequence. The future is unwritten. We could choose a path that leads to a greatly simplified world, one where most of the diversity and beauty we have inherited from 4 billion years of evolution is lost, replaced by a handful of hardy species and vast areas managed solely for human use. Or we could choose a different path, one where we learn to share the planet more equitably, where we recognize that protecting nature is protecting ourselves, where we accept the responsibility that comes with our power. As you drift towards sleep now, perhaps you can hold this awareness. You are part of the story we have just told. Your body is built from the same biochemistry that powers all life. Your cells contain mitochondria, remnants of ancient bacteria that merged with other cells billions of years ago. Your DNA carries echoes of our deepest ancestry, including genes shared with bacteria, with fish, with the first mammals, with the apes from which we recently diverged. You are evolution made conscious, stardust contemplating its origin, life aware of itself. And with that awareness comes possibility. Tomorrow, when you wake, you will make choices. Some of those choices, however small they may seem, will influence the future of life on Earth. Will you choose to learn more about the living world? Will you choose to support efforts to protect it? Will you choose to live in a way that reduces harm? These choices matter. They accumulate. Across billions of people, they shape the world. The story of life on Earth is not over. What comes next is still being written, and you are one of the authors. Before you drift completely into dreams, take a moment to feel gratitude for this extraordinary inheritance. 4 billion years of evolution. Countless species living and extinct, uncountable individual organisms struggling, adapting, and passing on their genes, all leading through an unbroken chain to you, here, now, alive on this blue planet, circling an ordinary star in the spiral arm of an ordinary galaxy. If you found peace in this journey through deep time, A like or a subscription helps this small channel reach others who might also find comfort in these quiet explorations of science and wonder. But mostly, just rest. Let the vast story wash over you. Let yourself feel small but also connected, a temporary expression of something ancient and ongoing. Let your breathing slow. Let your muscles relax. Let sleep take you gently into dreams. Good night. The earth spins on. Life continues, and tomorrow you will be part of it.